Here's a sneak peek from today's episode.
Text, I do really think it's important to think about and understand just what is happening socioculturally, maybe sociopolitically, because we don't have the luxury of operating in a vacuum. We're not just talking to our audiences one-on-one. There's so many other things that are pushing and pulling on them and occupying their mind space and also occupying, share of wallet. So we really need to think about what's happening in the bigger world. And if you can put those four things together, I think that helps make sure that your content is really reflecting what's authentic to you, but also aligning with what your end user audiences really want and need.
Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Kimberly. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Kimberly, I'm excited for this conversation. It's going to be a ton of fun. And it's something that I'm really hoping a lot of marketers take heart to. And they can use this episode. This is kind of my fun introduction. You can use this episode to do what you want to do. You can use this as ammunition to show your boss that this is the right way of doing content. So I'm excited. But before we get into that, Kimberly, let's get to know you and your career and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Well, please call me Kim. I'm Kim Hallman. I'm Senior Vice President of Institutional Marketing at 160 over 90. 160 is a branding and cultural marketing agency. This is season 12 for me with the firm. So I've been around for a long time here. The agency works with lifestyle brands, sports brands, education brands, entertainment brands, but I get to focus most of my time and energies working with colleges and universities and really helping them articulate who they are, what they stand for, how they want to show up in the world, why that matters to people now, and why it will continue to matter to people in the future.
I love it. And we always ask all of our guests, Kim, what do you love about content and marketing?
I could go on and on, but my short answer to that is I love giving voice to brands and in the process, giving agency to people who are advancing education and social impact missions. I think it's really powerful, and I think it's a privilege to be able to do.
Okay, I love it. So today what we're going to talk about is breaking out of the everything to everyone content trap. I'm excited about this because I have been in the seat as a marketer and someone comes to me and says, hey, the executive team wants us to broaden our message to include more people. And I am just pounding my head against the wall saying, that's not the right idea. Please, 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 please. So really, when we look at it, Kim, what are some of the signs that you see with businesses when they've kind of fallen into this trap where they're trying to communicate to everyone? What do you see? What's kind of the telltale signs of a business that's kind of been forced to do this?
Yeah. So it's a tricky time, right? Not just in marketing, but in the world. And exactly what you're saying, I think in this move to try and broaden appeal and being really sensitive to not alienate any potential audience segment, given that it is a pretty complicated sociocultural environment, we'll say, I think in the process, brands are starting to dilute their unique truth, and they're delivering a lot of the same marketing and messaging as their competitors, and it ends up just being a lot of white noise. So a couple of things that I think you can do to guard yourself against that as a content marketer, and also help guard, your brand, your organization, your company against this everything to everyone content trap. The first is just looking out for really generic messaging. If content feels overly broad, if your brand descriptors start to become these really long compound sentences with a million different qualifiers, that's a first sign to me that you are trying to appeal to everyone that you can, but in doing so, potentially deeply resonating with none of those audience segments. The second one would be lack of clear differentiation. So, when you see an organization that's really struggling to articulate what we talk about as a unique value proposition, right? It used to be a unique selling proposition back in the day, but now we've moved to value over selling because even that makes some people uncomfortable. But when you struggle to articulate what that even is, your messaging is blending in more than it's actually standing out. So you see particularly in higher ed, extensive use of jargon and buzzwords, right? We're trying to have these roll up ideas for what we can be in the future that appeals to everyone, but we're not saying much in the process, right? They're kind of these empty qualifiers that we're assigning. Another would be this sort of content disconnect across sub brands. So what I mean, by sub brands, you have in many cases like a parent organization and then different business lines. For example, this exists in higher ed a ton. You have like a main university, but then think about admissions, fundraising and advancement, athletics, different schools, but it exists in the consumer world too. You think about like a Nike, and then you think about different lines like a Nike tennis, for example, or something like that. When messages or content seem to be all over the map in terms of their verbal, but also their visual vocabulary, especially if they're coming from some of those sub brands that are trying to serve different audiences, it, I think, is an attempt at audience segmentation, but it actually presents as this content fragmentation, right? They don't feel like they're coming from a unified voice. And we don't all have to be saying the exact same things, but we should be sort of singing from the same songbook, if you will. And then maybe a last one that I would point to is just this attempt to chase trends over sticking to a tried and true strategy. Really reactive content or constantly pivoting to respond to every trending topic can actually weaken a brand's core identity and create a disconnect with its audiences. So certainly there are opportunistic moments to join in on conversations, but trend jacking, if you've heard of that term, I think is a major watch out. So those would be the handful of signs that I would say if you're getting really generic and broad, if you don't feel like you're pulling apart from your competitors, if you don't feel like you're saying the same thing at the highest level across your full organization, or if you're just trying to be relevant at the risk of actually truly being resonant with audiences, you're probably falling into the everything to everyone content trap.
I love that. That's such a good way of phrasing it. And I love the way that you looked at it. So that's really cool. Marketers, use that. Look at your content. Now, let's say we've fallen into the trap. And I'm guessing there's a lot of people that during that whole exercise are like, suck. Yep. Yeah. Check, check, check. What do we do now? Like, what do we do to fix it? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, so the first place to start is with strategy. And that in and of itself is not a novel concept, but I think the way that we think about it are sort of 4 cornerstones. And maybe that would be more helpful and more actionable for listeners. So we really take a deep dive into your institutional truths. And I'll talk about what each of these means in detail. Your category opportunities, your audience insights, and then also cultural context, right? What's happening around you. So when I say institutional truths, again, that's really like who you are, your core essence, the soul of the company that you work for. And I like to talk about it as a soul so it doesn't feel so transactional, but it also gets like at your values and your priorities and your mission and your vision. Category opportunity, you can also think of this if you want to as like a competitive landscape. It's really examining when and where other competitors, other brands are connecting with their audiences, how they're using content and outbound communications, and then thinking, 1, where can we borrow some inspiration? Because that's a great exercise. But 2, where is there actually some blank space that we can lean into? The third, which is really important here, is those audience insights. Yes, everyone has probably gone through the steps to identify their audiences, but pushing that further, really trying to understand almost psychographically, right? Like what are audience mindsets? What are their aspirations? What are their interests? What are their consumption patterns and their preferences? And really starting to sift through what they want from us, what they need from us, and what they expect from us as a brand that they're engaging with. And then actually prioritizing those audience groups, which is tricky. And I think a lot of folks resist doing that because it's hard to do, especially in higher ed, because we have so many stakeholder groups and we have to talk to donors and alumni, but also faculty and staff, but current students, but prospective students, but don't forget about corporate partners. And the list goes on and on. But really, it is important to prioritize them for the moment in time, at least, so that you can better focus content and deliver to them. And then the last piece, like I said, is applying that cultural context. I do really think it's important to think about and understand just what is happening socioculturally maybe sociopolitically, because we don't have the luxury of operating in a vacuum. We're not just talking to our audiences one-on-one. There's so many other things that are pushing and pulling on them and occupying their mind space and also occupying, share of wallet. So we really need to think about what's happening in the bigger world. And if you can put those four things together, I think that helps make sure that your content is really reflecting what's authentic to you, but also aligning with what your end user audiences really want and need. So that is my very compound answer to the first thing, right? Think strategically about who you are, about who your audiences are, about what's happening in the world and what other competitors or brands are saying. The second is to move past table stakes and really focus on differentiators. Or sometimes I talk about let's go from table stakes to hot takes.
That a lot. That's
Again,
great.
in higher ed, there's this echo chamber of marketing that happens in particular. So this comes up a ton. There is really strong equity in joining existing conversations that are out there, but also obviously starting new ones. The key in either scenario is to offer up something that feels a little bit different. Offer this counsel, I would say. It can be a first and only if your brand or your company or your organization can substantiate that, right? So you're first to market on something. That's amazing for content. You're new, you're unique, you're unusual, you're better, you're faster, whatever that is. But equally, I really do believe that powerful content can manifest as a fresh and well-articulated point of view on something. So if there's, topically something that's going on, it really is top of mind for people. Do we have a stake in that conversation, and how can we talk about it a little bit differently? If we don't have a stake in that conversation, if it doesn't make sense, let's not force ourselves into it. But if we do have something to offer and we can package that in a slightly different way or share a position that hasn't been fully expressed, then by all means, do that. And people, I think, really will value that and resonate with it. So, we can ask ourselves a couple questions. I just did this exercise in a workshop the other week. If you actually remove your brand name from content, or even from something like a mission statement, would your audience ever be able to distinguish it from one of your competitors, right? If it's anonymized, could someone tell that it's you by the word choices, by the spirit of what you're saying, by the tone and voice? And that's not easy to do, but often the answer is no. And when you put some of that content side by side with other competitors, you realize just how similar it is. The other thing that's helpful is think about, can you rephrase some of the language that's going into content? Can you shift away from some of those buzzwords or that industry jargon in a way that no one else is quite talking about things? So instead of relying on some of those industry cliches, really identifying and amplifying what is going to make you distinctive, because that's what strikes a chord with people. And then if I could offer a third, because people like things in threes, right? And this really gets into what is most actionable probably, is just always anchoring your content strategy in really defined themes, or what I talk about as story arcs. So I really believe a strong narrative framework can help ensure that all of your content is going to reinforce your core mission, your values, your expertise. Those defined themes are going to help an organization segue from just the strategic piece of content to actionable in-market messaging. They're going to help an organization move from surface level messaging to actually really compelling and differentiating narratives. I also think it helps you reconcile audience appetite or market appeal with really clear, focused thoughts for what you can offer. So again, I talk about them as story arcs, little play on words. You could probably just as easily think about them as story umbrellas, right? They hold multiple related storylines, but this idea of a story arc for me is just meant to get at this development, this continuous progression of storytelling, right? So an arc is structured, but it's not static. It's about capturing and holding attention, sort of taking audiences on a journey over the course of time. So getting into this story arc exercise to help anchor your strategy, I think can be really helpful.
I love it. Lots to digest right there. I'm going to throw in my 2 cents because I think this is amazing. Number one, if you are running into the issue of anyone in your business saying that we should have broader messaging, I think you should do that exercise that you just shared there, Kim, where you just take your competitors' content and your content, and I don't know if I'm too old, but the whiteout markers, take those actual markers, see if they can identify the difference. I think that would be more than eye-opening for someone to say, you're right, we do sound like everyone else. We do need to be a little bit different. The other thing that I would say that I think is a great litmus test for me personally, if your content doesn't dissuade some people from thinking they're a good fit, it's probably too broad. And I remember here locally where I'm in Utah, skiing and snowboarding is a great thing. I'm terrible at those sports. I'm tall. I have a lack of balance. It hurts when I fall. I'm a big dude. I've done it once, and I don't think my doctor would recommend I ever try it again. But there's a resort up here, and they got a Google review from someone. And that review was a 1-star review, and it said the slopes are too hard. So they took out a full-page magazine ad with this skier going down this crazy difficult slope and put that 1-star review right there. That was basically what it is. They advertised their 1-star review because they knew that their audience was the hardcore, give me the challenge, backcountry kind of a skier, as opposed to I want the nicest bunny hill you can imagine kind of a person. And that like won awards, that resonated with people because they knew who to say no to. And so, Kim, I love this framework. There's a lot to digest. I'm so grateful that AI is getting the transcript of this because there's going to be a lot of cool things to break down. Kim, we have run out of time, though. This is amazing. If anyone wants to connect with you online, how and where can they find you?
I would love that. I can talk about this for days, but I would say the easiest place would be on LinkedIn. I try and be pretty active there under Kimberly Hallman. Work shares, category commentary. I'm just fair warning, also some baby content because I'm a super proud new mama. But yeah, please, I'd love to connect and talk more about differentiating content and finding who your right fit audience is and speaking boldly to them.
Perfect. And we will link to Kim's profile in the show notes. Kim, thank you so much for the time and insights today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.